Okay, so last time we talked about brainstorming and how to get to a place where you had a draft thesis. Remember that your thesis statement is persuasive this time. It's giving your opinion about the topic that you've chosen, but it has to relate enough to the two articles that you can get extensive amounts of evidence from those two articles to support your main point. You're not allowed to have outside sources, and you should keep any sort of personal examples or hypothetical examples to a minimum. Most of your support should come from those two articles. So I've already started my outline. I have my draft thesis that I had from my brainstorming. Remember I told you at the end of the last video that draft thesis, it needed some tweaking, but it was good enough to get an idea. I've tweaked it a little bit so that now I think I have my final version of my thesis statement, though of course I could always come back to it and polish it a little bit more. Notice that I put in an extra part. So that draft thesis just starts with most Americans do not want to close the wage gap. Remember that a thesis statement has to have a context, a subject, and a claim. That draft thesis statement only had the subject and the claim, so I added in the context. So the context is that first part. Even though it's clear the wage gap causes many social and economic problems for many people, that's the context. Then I tweaked the topic just a little bit, though I largely kept the claim just the same. So instead of saying most Americans do not want to close the wage gap, I changed it a little bit to say most Americans believe economic inequality is necessary. Okay? So my claim here and what I'm arguing, remember I'm arguing a why. So all of my main points need to explain why economic inequality is necessary, or thought so by most Americans, because of the American dream. So now it's time to start some main points. Just in case any of you have chosen a similar topic, I'm only going to do one main point, so you don't feel like I stole your main point. I don't want to steal anybody's main point. But I do want to give you kind of a rundown of how you would put together your main point in your outlines. So my first main point is going to be about upward mobility. Remember in my brainstorming I came up with a couple potential main points. This was one of them, the idea of upward mobility. And what I'm talking about on this one is that the idea, or sometimes even people call it a myth, of upward mobility is something that Americans value. So all of their economic decisions Americans usually they make in terms of the idea of upward mobility, meaning that whatever their economic situation now, there's always the opportunity to move up in terms of economic class or status. So that's going to be my main point. I'll fashion it into a topic sentence later when I'm drafting. But thinking very specifically about subpoints and details here, I'm really trying to say something about typo. So essentially this is what I'm saying here. Poor people and middle class people have to have something to strive for. So they want to keep the upper income brackets available because they might get there someday. So they don't really want to close the wage gap. They believe economic inequality is necessary because they think someday they're going to be at the top while other people are still at the bottom. So the biggest thing to remember in this essay is that now your details, so this is a subpoint, now your details have to be from the articles. So you need to pull out quotes or paraphrases right directly from the articles that support your main points. So, and you want to have at least one piece of information from each article in each paragraph to keep it pretty balanced. You want to make sure that you have equal numbers of quotes and paraphrases from Article 1 and Article 2. Don't draw heavily from Article 1 and forget about Article 2 or vice versa. They need to be pretty equal. So a good rule of thumb is trying to use both articles in every paragraph. So from Schinker Osorio's article, I have this. So she says, she cites a statistic that the top 5% of wage earners get 84% of the wealth in America. And an exact quote she's got from this is that most Americans don't consider this to be a problem. And this came from page 434 in the article. So I'm going to put my in-text citation in just so that I have it in there and I don't have to go back and look for it when I'm drafting. So I've got that, and I'll integrate that correctly, but this is just an outline, so I don't need to necessarily integrate it right now. I will when I draft. And then from Parker, I don't have an exact quote, and that's okay. You don't always have to have an exact quote. I'm going to kind of summarize or paraphrase the part where she talks about having a house and a husband. She had a house and a husband and a good life and a good job, and she was basically living that American dream. Then she lost it all, and the tone that she talks about this shows that this was a really desirable life, and she'd love to get back there. So again, I'll integrate that correctly. I'll make sure that I have an correct in-text citation. That one didn't have published page numbers, so you don't have to put the page number in that one, but I'll make sure that I have Parker's last name in there and all that stuff, so that I have a correct MLA in-text citation. So basically, this is what your outline needs to look like for your main points. So you'll have some subpoints. You could keep going with this. I could make this a lot more in depth. I could have another subpoint like A, and I could give a couple more details from the articles to support that, and you should. But basically, this is the structure for your main points and for your outline. So you've got a thesis statement that tells your opinion on the topic that you've chosen from your analytical question that you've brainstormed out, and you have main points that support that thesis statement, and then the support for the main points, for the most part, come from those two articles equally. Okay? So hopefully that helps you see how this outline should go and kind of what we're doing. Remember, this is an argument paper, one that tells your opinion and gives your main points, but uses information from sources, the article pairs, to support your thesis statement and prove it. Okay? If you have any questions, as always, let me know. Otherwise, keep on keeping on.